was 1945. The war was over. Slowly, painfully, life came back to the ruins of Europe. The war was over, but there was no peace. Despair crouched over the continent. Hopelessness circled Europe like a bird of prey. Why? What were the forces? What were the issues in a war that turned nations into rubble heaps and populations into beggars? The people wanted the answers. They wanted to know what happened and why. In the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, the people of the world came together, for there sat the International Military Tribunal to judge the chief Nazi war criminals. Justice Robert H. Jackson, the chief American prosecutor, makes the opening statement for the prosecution.
The privilege of opening the first trial in history.
The privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. That four great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason. This inquest represents the practical effort of four of the most mighty of nations, with the support of 15 more, to utilize international law to meet the greatest menace of our times, aggressive war. The common sense of mankind demands that law shall not stop with the punishment of petty crimes by little people. It must also reach men who possess themselves of great power and who make deliberate and concerted use of it to set in motion evils which leave no home in the world untouched. In the prisoner's dock sit 20-odd broken men, reproached by the humiliation of those they have led, almost as bitterly as by the desolation of those they have attacked. Their personal capacity for evil is forever past. Merely as individuals, their fate is of little consequence to the world. What makes this inquest significant is that these prisoners represent sinister influences that will lurk in the world long after their bodies have returned to dust. They are living symbols of the arrogance and cruelty of power, of racial hatreds, of terrorism and violence. They are symbols of fierce nationalisms and of militarism, of intrigue. and war-making, which have embroiled Europe generation after generation, crushing its manhood, destroying its homes, and impoverishing its life. They have so identified themselves with the philosophies they conceived and with the forces they directed that any tenderness to them is a victory and an encouragement to all the evils which are attached to their names. What these men stand for, we will patiently and temperately disclose. We will give you undeniable proof of incredible events. The catalogue of crimes will omit nothing. It may be that these men of troubled conscience do not regard a trial as a favor, but they do have a fair opportunity to defend themselves, a favor which they rarely extended to their fellow countrymen. We will not ask you to convict these men on the testimony of their foes. There is no count of the indictment that cannot be proved by books and records. And we will show you the defendants' own films. You will see their own conduct and hear their own voices as they reenact for you from the screen some of the events in the course of the conspiracy. The acts of the defendants have bathed the world in blood. And set civilization back a century. They have subjected their European neighbors to every spoliation and deprivation. They have brought the German people to the lowest ebb of wretchedness. They have stirred hatreds and incited domestic violence on every continent. These are the things that stand in the dock shoulder to shoulder with these prisoners. The real complaining party at your bar is civilization.
The United States of America present count 1 of the indictment, that all the defendants participated as organizers or accomplices in a common plan or conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity.
The aims of this conspiracy were open and notorious.
The aims of this conspiracy were open and notorious. It was far different from any other conspiracy ever unfolded before a court of justice.
Pistol shots, and then wild firing. The heart leapt as old war experiences were relived.
Its history is the history of the Nazi Party, which grew from the brawling streets of Munich in the 20s. And from the beginning, Adolf Hitler and his followers were committed to the use of any means, whether or not they were legal or honorable. Their aim was the highest degree of control over the German community. Their intentions were blatantly put forth in Mein Kampf and the party program. And they preached their favorite doctrines up and down the land. They said that persons of a so-called German blood were a master race, entitled to subjugate or even exterminate other races. They said that the Germans should be ruled under the Führerprinzip, or leadership principle, by which each sub-leader owed unconditional obedience to his superior, and so on right up to Adolf Hitler. They said that war was a noble and necessary activity of Germans. And they said that the Nazi Party alone had the right to rule Germany and the right to destroy the party's enemies. Their rise to power was based on fraud, deceit, intimidation, and coercion, culminating finally in terror and flame. Into that flame went the democratic constitution of the Weimar Republic and the freedom of the German people. For the fires set by the Nazis extended to the very Reichstag. Hans Gesavius, a witness who formerly held a high position in the Berlin police administration, tells of his investigation of the Reichstag fire.
Es kurz zu sagen, zunächst den Tatbestand zu geben, haben wir festgestellt.
To speak briefly and to state the facts. First of all, we ascertained that quite generally, Hitler had stated the wish for a large-scale propaganda campaign. Goebbels took on the job of making the necessary proposals, and it was Goebbels who first thought of setting the Reichstag on fire. A group of 10 reliable SA men was made ready, and now Goering was informed about every detail of the plan. It was expected from Goering, and he gave his assurances that he would do so, that the police would be instructed, while still suffering from shock, to take up a false trail.
Using the Reichstag fire as a pretext for seizing power, the Nazi conspirators lost no time in tearing Germany away from a policy of peace. Late in 1933, they led their nation out of the disarmament conference, quit the League of Nations, and embarked on a course of secret rearmament. By 1934, the new armaments program designed by defendants Goering, Schacht, and Funk was going full blast. German industry was again turning out the tools of war. The Krupp plants hummed, and 1 year later, Goering could announce,
From the strong foundation of the National Socialist ideology, today rises once again the German armed forces.
a few days later, General von Blomberg announced the new law for compulsory military service. The law was signed by defendants Goering, Hess, Frank, Frick, Schacht, and von Neurath. The training began. Finally, in spring of 1936, the Nazis sent their new troops marching into the Rhineland.
Mein Führer, on March 7th, 1936, soldiers of the army, which was created by order of the Führer, crossed the sacred river of German history and occupied their former garrisons. They pledged the Führer, whatever decisions he may make, unbreakable faith and obedience, and they vowed to follow him and to prove their sincerity by their never-ending love for Germany.
The columns grew longer. The sound of boots grew louder on the streets of Nuremberg. But Hitler said,
The German people is not a people which welcomes a war today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. That is not in the character of the German. He is by nature not only peaceful and peace-loving, but above all conciliatory. He wants to work. In our country are millions of peasants. They want to till their fields, they want to bring in their harvest. There are millions of workers. They want to perform their work.
But the Nazi conspirators, in the name of Lebensraum, continued to plot new aggressions against peace. In November 1937, Hitler called a special meeting with defendants Goering, von Neurath, and Raeder, and generals von Blomberg and von Fritsch. The meeting was secret, but Lieutenant Colonel Hossbach, Hitler's personal adjutant, faithfully recorded Hitler's words.
The German question can be solved only by way of force. For the improvement of our military political position, it must be our first aim, in every case of entanglement by war, to conquer Czechoslovakia and Austria simultaneously. The annexation of the two states to Germany, militarily and politically, would constitute a considerable relief.
This meeting set the stage for Nazi expansion, and Act I came only 3 months later at Berchtesgaden, where Defendant von Papen finally engineered a meeting between Schuschnigg, the Austrian Chancellor, and Hitler and Defendants Keitel and von Ribbentrop. Guido Schmidt, who was Austrian Foreign Minister at the time, also attended the meeting, and now he takes the witness stand. Did Hitler demand that Seyss-Inquart be made Minister of Security?
That was one of the demands on their program.
Were there also demands made with regard to currency exchange and customs?
There were demands of an economic nature of every kind.
Hitler told you that you had until February 15th to accept his terms, didn't he? And he told you that if you didn't do so, he would use force?
The ultimatum, as Hitler stated it, was that he intended, as early as February, to march into Austria, and that, for the last time, he was prepared to postpone it.
Faced by these threats, the Austrians carried out all Hitler's demands. But the Nazi conspirators weren't satisfied. A month later, when Schuschnigg announced a plebiscite on Austrian independence, Hitler and Defendant Goering demanded the plebiscite be canceled. Another ultimatum demanded Schuschnigg resign within 3 hours. Fearing invasion, Schuschnigg resigned, and finally Defendant Seyss-Inquart was appointed the new Chancellor of Austria. That same day, Goering in Berlin called Kepler of the German embassy in Vienna. The conversation was transcribed. Kepler spoke first.
Well, we represent the government now. Yes, that's it. You are the government. Listen carefully. The following telegram should be sent here from Seyss-Inquart. Take the notes. The Provisional Austrian Government sends to the German government the urgent request to support it in its task to help prevent bloodshed. For this purpose, it asks the German government to send German troops as soon as possible.
Well, SA and SS are marching through the streets. Everything has collapsed for the professional groups.
Seyss-Inquart is the only one who still has power in Austria.
Yes.
Then our troops will cross the border today.
The act was written, joining Austria to Germany, and signed by defendants Seyss-Inquart, Goering, Frick, von Ribbentrop, and Hess. Hitler, of course, had said,
Germany neither intends nor wishes to interfere in the internal affairs of Austria, to annex Austria or to conclude an Anschluss. 21st of May, 1935, Adolf Hitler.
The curtain fell on Act I, but already the Nazi conspirators prepared for Act II, with this 1938 memorandum from Hitler to his high command.
It is my unalterable decision to smash Czechoslovakia by military action in the near future. It is the job of the political leaders to bring about the politically and militarily suitable moment.
Konrad Henlein was designated political leader. The plan was labeled Operation Green, and Defendant Jodl issued another memorandum reading,
Operation Green will be set in motion by means of an incident in Czechoslovakia, which will give Germany provocation for military intervention. The fixing of the exact time for this incident is of the utmost importance.
A few months later, Germany signed the Munich Pact with England, France, and Italy. This pact involved the transfer of the Sudetenland to Germany. The conspirators called it their last territorial demand. But before the ink was dry, they were making other plans. For Hitler's goal was the complete absorption of Czechoslovakia. And now the Czech president, Hácha, was called to a meeting with Hitler and defendants Goering, von Ribbentrop, and Keitel. They gave him the ultimatum. Bohemia and Moravia would be incorporated into Germany immediately, or Czechoslovakia would be invaded and Prague destroyed from the air. Hácha was helpless. Defendants von Ribbentrop and Frick signed the decree making Bohemia and Moravia a German protectorate. Speaking some months before about the Sudetenland, however, Hitler had said,
I have promised, and repeat it here, that there will be no more territorial problems for Germany in Europe. I will be no longer interested in the Czech state, and I will guarantee it. 26 September 1938, Adolf Hitler.
Now, according to more of his adjutant's notes, Hitler reviewed the Nazi plan of violence and treachery from 1934 to 39. The notes read,
First, rearmament. In 1935, the introduction of compulsory military service. After that, militarization of the Rhineland. 1 year later, Austria came. It brought about a considerable reinforcement of the Reich. The next step was Bohemia and Moravia. Then followed the erection of the protectorate, and with that, the basis for action against Poland was laid. Basically, I did not organize the armed forces in order not to strike. The decision to strike was always in me.
In the name of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Sir Hartley Shawcross presents Count 2, Crimes Against Peace, charging that all the defendants participated in the planning and waging of wars of aggression, wars in violation of international treaties, agreements, and assurances.
First step was the Rhineland, and the next step was Austria.
the Rhineland is occupied, Austria and Czechoslovakia are seized by Germany, and now the Nazi conspirators turn to the next problem, the conquest of Poland. Again, an adjutant, Lieutenant Colonel Schmundt, transcribed Hitler's words.
The solution of the problem demands courage. It is impossible without invasion of foreign states or attacks on foreign property. There's therefore no question of sparing Poland, and we are left with the decision to attack Poland at the first suitable opportunity. We cannot expect a repetition of the Czech affair. There will be war.
Meanwhile, according to their well-established practice, the conspirators stirred up the Danzig issue to furnish frontier incidents which could justify an attack on Poland. Then, on 23 August, the Nazis signed their non-aggression pact with Russia. Then Hitler told his high command,
Now Poland is in the position in which I want her. I'm only afraid that at the last moment some Schweinehund will make a proposal for mediation.
appeals were made, twice by the Pope and by President Roosevelt.
Finally, Mr. Roosevelt asks that assurance be given him that the German armed forces will not attack and, above all, not invade the territory or possessions of the following independent nations. He then names as those coming into question
Finland, Lettland, Litauen, Estland, Norwegen, Schweden, Dänemark, Niederlande, Belgien, Großbritannien, Irland, Frankreich, Portugal, Spanien, die Schweiz, Liechtenstein, Luxemburg, Polen. Meine Antwort.
On 1 September 1939, the Nazis sent the Wehrmacht smashing into Poland and into a new world war. For France and England, faithful to their mutual assistance pact with Poland, immediately declared war on Germany. the Luftwaffe opened mass attacks on Polish towns and cities. And Hitler, according to Schmundt's notes, said,
Destruction of Poland in the foreground. I shall give a propagandist cause for starting the war. Never mind whether it be plausible or not. Have no pity. Take a brutal attitude.
But, as usual, before the attack on Poland, Hitler told the world,
During the troubled months of the past year, the friendship between Poland and Germany has been one of the reassuring factors in the political life of Europe. 30th of January, 1939, Adolf Hitler.
the path of destruction started in Poland, but soon it led north and south across all Europe. And each new aggression was based on Hitler's principle that in war, victory, not right, is what matters.
Non-aggression treaty. It is firmly resolved to maintain peace between Denmark and Germany in all circumstances. 31st of May, 1939, Ribbentrop.
But on 9 April 1940, German troops invaded Denmark.